You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're just exhausted from trying to be your best self for far too long. We live in an age where even rest makes us feel guilty, and silence needs to be scheduled. Each morning, you wake up carrying an invisible weight. Be strong, be positive, don't stop. But what happens when you've done everything right and still feel empty? This video isn't here to judge you, it's here to set you free. Because maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe it's the performance you've been forced to keep up day after day, smile after smile, task after task. Today, we'll take off the mask of productivity, reconnect with the forgotten parts of your soul, and finally understand the truth behind your fatigue. You're not failing, you're just tired of constantly performing. You wake up not because you're rested, but because the alarm says it's time to perform again. The sunlight isn't soft, it's loud. It reminds you, you have to get moving, get better, get ahead. And yet, something inside you already feels tired. Not from effort, but from expectation. From the invisible weight of always needing to be on, always needing to do more just to feel enough. This exhaustion doesn't come from weakness. It's what happens when your entire identity is built around proving yourself, constantly. Byung-Chul Han called it the exhaustion of the self, a silent burnout not caused by others, but by you, driven by a false freedom. In today's world, you are no longer pushed by external rules or harsh orders. You are pulled, gently but powerfully, by internalized ideals that whisper, "You should." And because they sound like your own voice, you believe them. You think you're free. But what if you're not choosing, just complying with a system disguised as freedom? You can do anything sounds empowering, but when it becomes, you must do everything, the message changes. Suddenly, every rest feels like laziness. Every no becomes guilt. Every pause becomes a fear of falling behind. This is not ambition. This is the pressure of wearing a mask. You've turned into your own manager, bossing yourself into a corner where even rest has to be earned. And in that corner, something begins to fracture. Gabor Maté explains this kind of burnout doesn't begin in your schedule. It begins in your soul. It's not about having too much to do. It's about never having space to feel. When you suppress your sadness, ignore your hunger for stillness, reject your need for connection, you don't become stronger. You become numb. You walk through life with a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. You say, "I'm fine," while silently hoping someone notices you're not. But nobody notices, because everyone's tired too. Everyone's performing. So the show goes on. You tell yourself, "I chose this." But did you? Did you really choose to turn your passions into productivity metrics? Did you choose to judge your day not by joy, but by output? Even your hobbies, the books you read, the walks you take, the breaths you slow down for, have become a way to optimize. Everything is tracked, timed, and measured. Rest isn't rest. It's another checkbox on a self-improvement to-do list. You're no longer living. You're managing yourself like a project. And yet, the most dangerous part is this. You believe the voice that says you're failing. That voice that tells you you should have done more. You should have been better. You're behind. But maybe the truth is simpler, quieter, and more human. You are not failing. You're surviving in a system that's burning everyone out. That one sentence, when heard with an open heart, can unchain years of silent shame. There is power in realizing that your exhaustion isn't a personal flaw. It's not because you lack ambition or focus or willpower. It's because you've been living inside a machine that doesn't value being, only doing. A machine that confuses your worth with your wins, that defines your value by your visibility, that turns every emotion into data, every moment into content, every silence into something to fill. But what if silence is the answer? What if the burnout you feel is not a sign you're broken, but a signal you're human in a culture that forgot how to be. This shift in perspective doesn't demand that you quit your job, abandon your goals, or reject ambition. It simply asks you to return. Return to yourself, to the part of you that was never meant to chase validation, to the voice inside that doesn't shout, but whispers. Breathe. Pause. Live. You may have felt this during the pandemic, when the world stopped and for a brief moment there was no performance to uphold, no hustle to glorify, just you. And in that stillness, many of us met our true selves, confused, tired, lost, but quietly free. And when the world opened back up, we were told to get back on the stage, pretend nothing happened. But something did happen, and it's still happening, inside you. If you've felt stuck lately, if your mind keeps racing but your soul keeps stalling, this is not failure. It's a quiet rebellion. It's your humanity trying to come home. And the first step home is not drastic, it's gentle. It might be as simple as waking up and not reaching for your phone. As you notice the wind instead of checking your inbox. As drinking your coffee without the soundtrack of self-judgment playing in your head. This is not a productivity hack. It's a reconnection, not a reset to do more, but a reminder to be more present. And in that presence, you will begin to see clearly. You were never broken. You were just tired of performing all the time. This weariness, this silent ache in your chest, was not a flaw in your character. It was the residue of a life spent trying to become enough in a world that constantly moves the finish line. In Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault described how society once relied on clear prohibitions, prisons, punishments, and rules shouted by authority figures. But the world has shifted. Now, control is subtle, anonymous, almost polite. You're no longer being ordered around. You're being gently invited. And that invitation is cloaked in seductive language. Freedom, empowerment, choice. You're told you can do anything. But beneath that promise lies the unspoken demand that you must do everything. You work. Not because someone forces you, but because you've been conditioned to believe that not working means you're worthless. You wake up and reach for your phone, not to connect, but to compare. You check your calendar, your productivity app, your to-do list, not because you're excited, but because you've learned to tie your self-worth to how much you accomplish. You call this freedom, but it's a loop, a mirror maze, a performance that never ends. You become both the performer and the critic, the worker and the boss. You discipline yourself so thoroughly that external discipline becomes unnecessary. The walls of the prison have dissolved, but you carry the bars within you. You're not in prison, you are the prison, Foucault might say today. Because you supervise yourself now. You measure your rest, you optimize your routines, you scrutinize your emotions. You calculate your value based on metrics no one made you use, but everyone silently agreed upon. This is the age of self-surveillance, of internalized judgment, and nowhere is that clearer than in how you treat your own exhaustion. You don't rest because you need to. You rest so you can keep going. Even your downtime is trapped in the logic of production. Byung-Chul Han calls this the rise of the achievement subject. You're no longer merely a worker. You are an entrepreneur of the self, a brand, a startup, a personal project that must always be growing, scaling, and improving. But here's the truth no one dares to speak. No one can scale themselves forever. No one can optimize their being without eventually cutting away the soft, quiet parts that make us human. The moments of stillness, the joy of purposeless presence, the sacred emptiness where creativity is born. The more you measure, the more you miss. The more you try to become, the further you drift from simply being. Even leisure has been hijacked. You read books, but they must be self-help. You meditate, but it must improve your performance. You sleep, but it must be tracked, evaluated, and perfected. You don't relax to feel alive. You relax to be more productive. And so even peace becomes another checkbox. Even rest is framed as recovery for more labor. You don't remember how to do anything. You don't remember how to exist without a goal. You think you're in control, but the system has moved inside you. You obey without realizing, driven by invisible scripts that tell you who to be, how to win, and what is enough. And when you fail to meet these impossible expectations, you blame yourself. You call it laziness, weakness, a lack of will. But it's not. It's grief. The grief of a self that was never allowed to rest. The grief of a soul that was turned into a project. You are your own boss, but also your most exhausted employee. You demand from yourself more than any external authority ever would. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you are not a machine. You are not an algorithm. You are not a brand. You are a living, breathing, feeling being, craving connection, silence, wonder, slowness. None of those things can be monetized. None of them will win you followers or awards. But they are what make life real. Think of the last time you did something for no reason, not to get ahead, not to improve, just because it felt alive. That moment, however fleeting, is your proof that you are still human beneath the layers of performance. And that's where healing begins. When you stop asking, "Am I enough?" and start whispering, "I am." Not because you earned it, but because you are here. Awake, aware, learning to live again, not as a task, but as a truth. This isn't about quitting your job or renouncing ambition. It's about remembering that your worth is not a performance. Your rest is not laziness. Your stillness is not failure. The world has taught you to hustle. Now, you must teach yourself how to be whole, and yet the pressure doesn't just vanish. It comes back, wrapped in sweetness, in cheerful voices and shiny slogans. It says, "You can do it," with such warmth that you don't see the hand behind your back, pushing you forward when all you want is to rest. This is the gentle violence of toxic positivity, the kind that smiles while it suffocates you. From an early age, you are fed the narrative. If you try hard enough, you'll succeed. But what no one said aloud is that this was never truly a promise. It was a threat cloaked in inspiration. Yes, you can becomes far more brutal than no, you can't, because it leaves no space for stopping, for grieving, for simply being. Prohibition gives you boundaries, but permission that feels like an obligation becomes a prison without walls. You no longer need someone to force you. You force yourself, fearing that rest is failure, that slowing down is weakness. And then, the most sacred parts of you, your feelings, are suppressed in service of this illusion. You're told not to feel tired, not to feel lost, not to feel sad. You're taught that depression is a flaw in your mindset, that burnout is just a lack of discipline, that if only you practiced more gratitude, meditated longer, optimized harder, you would be okay. But this isn't the truth. This is erasure. This is a system that refuses to see your exhaustion as valid, that turns your suffering into a personal defect instead of what it really is, a collective wound inflicted by a culture that worships productivity over presence. You are not broken. You're responding in the only way a human soul knows how, when it's been told for too long that its worth depends on how brightly it can shine. Gabor Maté reminds us, burnout, anxiety, depression, these are not personal failings, but social symptoms. They are natural responses to unnatural expectations. When your nervous system trembles, when your thoughts scatter like dust, when your chest tightens under invisible weight, it's not weakness. It's your body whispering the truth your mind has been trained to ignore. The truth is that this system was not built for your wholeness. The truth is that the problem is not in you, but around you. A society that does not allow for emotional vulnerability will inevitably pathologize those who feel. But feeling is not the flaw. Feeling is how we survive. And yet, the most dangerous outcome of all this isn't just fatigue. It's self-hate. You don't only feel tired, you blame yourself for being tired. You internalize the voice of the system, turn it inward and weaponize it against yourself. You begin to believe you're lazy, undisciplined, ungrateful. You lose compassion for your own fragility. You begin to see your humanity as something to fix. And that is the ultimate violence, to convince someone to hate themselves for not thriving in an environment that is quietly killing them. But there's another truth, buried beneath the noise. You are not lazy. You've been emotionally seduced by a world that repackages pressure as positivity, that sells you slogans instead of space, that gives you mantras instead of mercy. And you've done your best. Truly, you have. You kept going when your heart was fraying. You kept smiling when your insides were aching. You kept saying, "I'm fine," when you hadn't felt okay in weeks. That is not a weakness, that is survival. But you were never meant to just survive. You were meant to feel, to rest, to be. So today, maybe you let the silence in. Maybe you stop performing. Maybe you sit with yourself, not to fix anything, but simply to remember that you exist beyond what you produce. That your worth is not waiting at the finish line of your to-do list. That your value does not fluctuate with your level of energy or enthusiasm. That your inner peace cannot be measured by the number of hours you meditate or how productive your rest looks. You're not a project. You are a person. And people get tired. People get lost. People get overwhelmed. That is not a crisis. That is being alive. This realization is not an excuse to quit. It's an invitation to begin again. To rebuild your life, not as a constant climb, but as a rhythm. One that includes pausing, breathing, saying no. Saying, "I don't want to be more productive today. I just want to feel like myself again." That desire is not weakness. It's wisdom. And in honoring it, you're not stepping away from your growth. You are finally stepping into your humanity. Because growth is not just hustle. It is healing. It is presence. It is the courage to say, "This version of success is not mine. I want something softer, something real." And when you say that, when you claim your own definition of enoughness, you're not falling behind. You're waking up from a dream that was never yours, and in that awakening, you will begin to find your way back. Not to the grind, but to yourself. Not the version of you that smiles on cue or checks off tasks for praise, but the version that breathes quietly beneath the noise. The one that has been waiting, not to perform, not to impress, but simply to be felt again. Somewhere along the line, you are taught that presence only has value when it produces something, that to rest is to fall behind, that to be still is to be invisible. And slowly, you traded your soul for a spotlight. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." He was speaking of the shadow, the parts of yourself you were taught to exile. Your fear, your sorrow, your failures, your confusion, your mess. But what happens when the culture itself tells you that these parts are not just unworthy, but dangerous? That to feel too deeply is a weakness? That to slow down is laziness? That exhaustion is a badge of honor? You bury the very signals that your soul uses to speak. You suppress your pain and call it positivity. You deny your limits and call it strength. You force yourself to smile when you're breaking inside and call it resilience. But there is a violence in that pretending, a slow erasure of the self. Toxic positivity is not just a bad idea, it's a quiet poison, one that whispers to you in the voice of self-help. You just need to be more disciplined. You just need to manifest better. You're not burnt out, you're just ungrateful. And the most dangerous lie of all, you are the problem. But as Gabor Maté reminds us, symptoms like anxiety, depression, disconnection, these are not individual malfunctions. They are society's warning signs. They are the body's final cry for help when the soul has been silenced too long. You are not broken. You are reacting brilliantly, instinctively, to a system that asks you to be a machine when you were built to be human. A system that calls you lazy when you're grieving, that calls you weak when you're overwhelmed. That celebrates your productivity while quietly killing your joy. In a world obsessed with constant improvement, healing can feel like rebellion. And maybe it is. Because when you stop performing, even for a moment, something terrifying happens. You meet yourself, the self behind the metrics, the self behind the smile, the self you've forgotten how to hold. You see, the pressure to become your best self has turned into a trap, an endless performance loop that rewards you for being inspirational, but punishes you for being real. You were never meant to be a brand. Your existence is not a campaign. Your value is not tied to how many books you've read, how many goals you've crushed, or how aesthetically you live. But the world won't remind you of this. It will keep offering you productivity hacks and morning routines and 10 ways to be your most optimized self. It will give you dopamine hits and checklists. It will say, be still, but only if you're meditating to get better at working. It will say, rest, but only if it recharges you to get back to producing. It will sell you silence as a tool, but never as a destination. Because true stillness, true silence, is unprofitable. It makes you uncontrollable. And that, to a world built on your performance, is dangerous. But you can reclaim it. Slowly, softly, without apology. You can learn to rest, not for recovery, but for reconnection. You can choose a walk with no destination, a breath with no purpose, a moment with no measurement. You can choose to feel without needing to fix. You can choose to sit with your sadness like an old friend instead of exiling it like a curse. You can whisper back to the parts of you you've ignored, you're allowed to stay. And in doing so, you begin to call your shadow home. You begin to make the unconscious conscious. You begin to stop calling it fate when you sabotage yourself. Because now you see why. And that seeing changes everything. You're not a project to be fixed. You're not a productivity tool. You're not here to impress a world that will forget your highlights the moment you pause. You're here to live. Fully. Imperfectly. Truly. The world taught you how to hustle. Now, you must teach yourself how to be whole. You're not lost. You are just far from yourself. But the way home has always been waiting. And you, exactly as you are, weary and wonderful, are ready to return. Not by sprinting toward the next breakthrough, not by hustling toward the next version of your so-called better self, but by standing still long enough to hear your real self whisper beneath all the noise. The healing begins not with action, but with permission. Permission to stop, to not respond, to not optimize, to not be impressive, to just be. Byung-Chul Han writes, "The ability to not be able is the truest form of freedom." You were told that freedom was the ability to do more, to produce more, to achieve more, to prove more. That freedom was the power to act. But Han offers a radical truth. Real freedom is the power to not, the ability to walk away, to turn the phone off, to leave the email unanswered, to let the sun set without a single box checked, to say no, not because you are defiant, but because you are done betraying your body for approval. You are done betraying your mind for a gold star. You are done betraying your soul for applause that dies the moment you walk off the stage. We are not suffering because we are weak. We are suffering because we are expected to be strong all the time. Strong enough to ignore pain, strong enough to silence grief, strong enough to smile when everything inside is asking for space. But healing doesn't happen through force. Healing happens in the pause, the sacred, silent pause where you are not being evaluated, not being measured, not being judged. The kind of pause society fears because it cannot profit from your stillness. Michel Foucault once said that the final act of resistance in a performance-driven world is to stop moving. The system isn't afraid of rebellion. It's not afraid of your complaints or your burnout or even your breakdown. What it fears most is your stillness. Because stillness is not passive, it is disruptive. Stillness breaks the rhythm of the machine. Stillness reminds you that you are never supposed to move this fast, reply this quickly, grind this endlessly. Stillness makes space for clarity, and clarity makes space for choice. And choice is power. Gabor Maté reminds us, healing is not something you pursue so that you can get back to work more efficiently. You don't need to feel better to function better. You need to feel better to feel again. You need to return not to the role you were playing, but to the aliveness you left behind. Because there is a world of difference between surviving and living. Surviving is the performance. Living is the presence. And no one else can give you that shift but you. This is not an invitation to abandon responsibility, but to remember your humanity inside it. To hold your phone and remember your hands. To do your job and still remember your heart. To love people without losing yourself. To walk slower. To breathe deeper. To take the pressure off your shoulders long enough to feel what it's like to exist without condition. That is the quiet revolution. That is the rebellion. To stop running not because you've failed, but because you no longer need to prove that you're worthy of rest. There will be voices that call this laziness. Let them speak. Let them name what they do not understand. What they call laziness is often grief. What they call weakness is often wisdom. What they call slowing down is often healing in motion. And maybe it's time to redefine the metrics. Maybe it's time to measure a life not in output but in aliveness. Not in what you've built, but in how much of yourself remains unbroken inside the building. Dare to be unproductive without guilt. Dare to answer late. Dare to not answer at all. Dare to say, this can wait, and let it wait. Dare to sit in silence and call it sacred instead of useless. Dare to be alone and feel the miracle of your own company. Dare to walk away from the version of you that everyone praises, but you no longer recognize. Because your worth has never been in what you deliver, it has always been in what you are. And if there's a voice inside still whispering, but you're falling behind, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, behind what? Behind whom? Maybe you're not falling behind. Maybe you're just refusing to chase something that was never meant for you. Maybe the tiredness you feel is not weakness, but wisdom. A deeper part of you is pulling you back from the brink. A quiet plea from your soul. Please stop performing. Please just come home. You are not lazy. You're just tired of becoming someone you were never meant to be. That line you've been walking between function and feeling, between role and reality, between the mask and the mirror, it's wearing thin. And you know it. Somewhere deep in your bones, you know it's time. Time to lay down the costume. Time to stop curating your pain for mass appeal. Time to let yourself grieve what you gave up just to be accepted. And then to begin again. Gently, honestly, slowly, without spectacle, without hashtags, without needing it to look like healing. Just you. Sitting with the truth of where you are. No more pretending, no more reaching, no more scripts. It's not about becoming new. It's about remembering you were never broken. So now, remove the mask. Breathe and begin again. Not as a brand, not as a project, but as a person.